see us being able to create stronger ties with more independently libertarian type voters? Do you see there being a way to reach out to that? I had done a sort of a review of a segment last week of a, libertarian type podcast with Joel Valenzuela and my local RNC chairman, Chris Maidman. And they were talking about how they were just like, they're Edelblue guys, and they're like, just at a point where they're totally fed up with Sununu. They're like, he's tanked our economy. Everything good that he did has been completely undone by his capitulation to, the worry science or whatever that they, however they want to frame it. And they're over it with him, and they feel really infringed upon. And I like, whether we agree with them or not, it's like, they were willing to kind of step out and say, hey, maybe we got to accept a Democratic governor for a term if we're going to, get what we want. And obviously I want to sort of like point out, I'm not endorsing the Free State Project, right? Like,
yeah,
like at all, because they've harbored neo-Nazis, they've harbored pedophile excusers.
Sure.
The movement itself, based off of Soren's original text, was formulated on like, we want to secede from the Union, which is a really bad look. So I want to be clear that I'm not condoning that. But it is, I think it's really important for us to acknowledge left libertarianism in this state, and to try and at least like have some sort of introspection or autopsy of that interaction that we have with our more populist counterparts on the other side of things, that would still say, like, I'm an independent voter. I don't necessarily always go to the Republicans. Yeah, I vote for them when it suits me. But, like, if we can meet up on issues like police demilitarization right now, I don't see what the problem is. So I'm just wondering what your stance on that is.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great question. I think it's important to point out that the opposite of libertarianism is authoritarianism. And so if we're opposing, like the massive amounts of authority in which the state and government has been wielding, I think it's important to recognize that there are certain issues that it is okay to, think through working together with. I think some differences, though, that I just want to point out is that, libertarians, well, a lot of them are like, socially progressive. It's the fiscal issues that seem to be a huge barrier. They don't believe in government funded like anything. Like, they don't believe in welfare systems. And so I think it's important to balance that a lot of our core beliefs are very different, because we believe it's the government's duty to help people. And they are just so individualistic in their mindset, and, the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, which I'd say we are very distant from. So I think a side thing I do outside of the New Hampshire youth movement, I started an abortion fund here in New Hampshire. And I think that, to me, is the perfect example of a place that I would love to build the bridge with the Libertarian Party, because I know that we share a core belief in reproductive rights. So when it comes to like a case-by-case issue, I'm definitely open to those bridges. But would I say, let's, fully integrate our ideas and build, in a more long-term sustainable way together?
Yeah.
Probably not, because it comes back to those compromising of values that I'm not in favor of. So
right. And that's a really good sort of thing to indicate right there, is like, we will like the openness to work, but it's like, that has absolutely nothing to do with what we were talking about earlier with compromising values. And, like the thing that the real challenge that I see the left having, especially a young populist left in response to a more young populist right, is the idea of like, okay, so these guys aren't for big social programs, right? We're not they're super against like the government doing anything. And oftentimes they're sort of like, we'll put it all into private, right? And for me, I think about like, okay, well, yeah, but we don't have any authority over private ownership, right? Like
Right.
nobody can come in and say anything about how somebody really runs their business aside from that person really breaking egregious laws. But I mean, anybody knows, I don't know a single person that hasn't been in a toxic work environment at some point. So, and those businesses just continue to thrive anyway. So it's not like having problems in your workplace I mean you all of a sudden shouldn't have a business anymore. You know what I mean? Like, the point being is like there's no authority that we as people, as workers, have over those folks. And the government itself is like government as a word is really just sort of like talking about a representation of people in our country by a democratic means, right? So those people are directly accountable to us. Like we give them their jobs and we can take them away too, right? So the thing I always want to sort of frame to that libertarian side, and I think is like an argument that maybe we on the left could engage with a little more, is like, well, isn't that kind of a breach of your personal rights? Like, do you really feel like it's okay for a private company who you have no authority over to come in and, I mean, what was it in the case of Hampstead? It was like there was a company that was pulling water out of the ground and selling it. And then all of a sudden the town water went dry because the aquifer was connected, like.
Yeah. Or Hobby Lobby telling their employees that they can't get birth control. Like,
right. It's like there's a lot of stuff here. And it's like, how is that any better? You know what I mean? And like,
yeah,
let's have a reframe of like, look, most of us don't want massive government either, because a lot of the problems that the left takes with the government right now is the back scratchy, like crony capitalist bureaucracy that really kneecaps any kind of progress at all. So on that, we relate. And, it's like that needs to be the focus. And that's more a function of private enterprise than it is of governmental enterprise. And I think like having open and fair elections, like that kind of thing, when we're going through a primary process, to not spend the time focusing on your opponent that you might be facing in the general, but like focus on distinguishing yourself from the people you're running against within your primary. Like, let's really use democracy the way it's supposed to be used. And I think we'd find that we preserve a lot more of those base liberties, and we can have things like paid family medical leave, and we can have things like Medicare for all, and still have a relatively small government, because maybe we just like stopped going to war with countries that we don't need to go to war with because we want their oil. Like,
yeah.